everyone. Welcome. My name is Paige, and I am a District Public Library, and we are here for a part of virtual programming brought to you by the library, and we're going to be talking all this month about mysteries. So today, I'm joined by Dr. Andria Woodell from Central Oregon Community College, and we're going to be talking about the power of conspiracy theories. Dr. Andria Woodell is a professor of psychology at Central Oregon Community College. In 2017, she was the recipient of the Burlington COCC Faculty Achievement Award for teaching, leadership, and professional excellence. She is passionate about serving as a translator of psychological science to the general public. Some of her more colorful presentations have been for the DPL Know Series, where she has had the opportunity to share current research on infamous psychology research scandals, why people are interested in life after death, and exploring why there is a fascination with serial murder. And we're going to add to her repertoire tonight with conspiracy theories. Andrea, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me again. This is, it's always a great little series to be part of, because at this point in my career, I am definitely more of a generalist who can talk about a lot of different topics. And so the Know series gives me an opportunity to really just dig into a specific topic that I can often bring back to my classes in fun ways. And so conspiracy theories was also a fun one to go down the rabbit hole in and learn a little bit more about what's going on with the research on conspiracy theories and bring them back to you all and see what's happening at that point. So, okay, so I'm just trying to get my head on straight real quick. So first of all, before we get into conspiracy theories and why we have conspiracy theories and why we're interested in them, we need to talk a little bit about how people understand the world, like how they're processing the world, why we want to understand the world and what's going on. And this will give us kind of a foundation to understand why we get interested in conspiracy theories. So, first of all, humans, we really need to know about what's happening in the world. So and it makes sense because it is kind of from a survival perspective, in the sense that when something has happened and it's negative, we want to understand why that happened and how do I avoid it in the future. And then when something that's happened is positive, we want to understand why did that happen and how do I make it happen again? And then if it's just weird, so like if somebody's doing something for you that's nice or something that's out of character and you don't fully understand what the rationale is behind why they're doing it, because we can't mind read, we're going to try to put kind of explanations on their behavior. So we're going to say, are they doing this because they just really want to do something kind for me? Are they doing this because they're trying to brown nose me to get me to do something? What is going on? So we're always trying to figure out what's happening in our environment, just like I said, just to kind of help us get a lay of the land and figure out what's going on and to understand how do we interact with people in the future. So the way we understand the world, there's a lot of different ways that we're going to get information about the world to help us inform our conclusions about things. So why do we think things happen? And so we can rely on our intuition, which is our gut feelings, our emotion, our instinct. This is just how we feel about this. We might also resort to authority. So we're going to look at what the laws are saying, what the norms are saying, what our parents are telling us, what our religious organizations are telling us, what our society's telling us. And we're using those trusted experts to kind of guide us on explaining what's happening and how we should respond. We can also use reason. So we can go through kind of logically trying to say, well, this potentially happened here. And so that could be why this happened. And so by a kind of a chain of events, this is what our assumption is, what might happen in the future. So reason is, that can be, when you think about philosophy and things like that, trying to reason it out and understand how things are working. Experience then is also coming off your own observations, your own personal experiences. This is what happened to me, so that's why I think this is what's going on. And then we also have the scientific method. So this is going through collecting data, controlling for factors, changing one thing at a time, seeing how it responds, and then moving forward based off that. Okay, so these are all the different ways that we can help understand strange events that are going on. Okay, now, one of the things about this though, and this is where we start getting into conspiracy theories, is that what people don't realize is that most of if you're looking back at these different ways of understanding the world, they all have their pros and cons to them. And they all can backfire on us at different times. So intuition is often biased by, it can be biased by emotion. Like your intuition can be like you're having a fear response to something and you don't understand why you're having a fear response. Authority figures can be presenting things out there to oppress other people. Reason can be completely faulty if you don't have the right assumptions to start off of. The scientific method, as much as we like to herald that in the science community, can't address every question out there. And it's not always appropriate for all the different experience, all the different things. And plus we don't have the time sometimes to go and do all the work to try to understand this, especially in the moment for each individual person. And then our experience could be limited. We just may not have enough experiences for the new event to be able to understand how to respond. So this is one of the things that, we go through collecting information to help us understand what's going on. But as I mentioned, it can backfire. And our brain, this is Daniel Kahneman's work, is often trying to strive for efficiency. So it's looking for what's the quickest way I can make a decision to move on and not use up a bunch of resources over accuracy. Okay. And we tend to think that we are these, they call it system 1 and system 2 thinking. And we tend to think when we're making decisions and coming to conclusions that we're doing it because we're conscious, we've really thought this out, and that we're all coming up with our opinions off really valid, solid information. So that's how humans tend to assume that our decisions are being made. When in reality, probably 90% of our decisions in the world are based off these shortcuts. It's a system 1 kind of thinking. So system 1 means that we automate a lot of our decisions throughout our life. So this is just to help us make quick decisions, move on. What's happening? It's probably this, move on. What's happening here? It's this, move on. We don't have a lot of time to weigh every little thing that we come across. We just have to move on and spend more time on the things that require more brain power to it. The dilemma with this is that although our brain strives for efficiency over accuracy, one of the dilemmas that gets us in trouble, and we'll see this with conspiracy theories and our inability sometimes to admit when we're wrong, or inflexibility of adapting to new information, is that we really think we're correct because we think we're rational, and we don't realize we're incorrect because we're making these biased decisions most of the time. And this isn't a bad thing. I mean, this works most of the time in our life. Like, it's not going to have a huge impact on our life in general, but it can become problematic when you come up with new information and it's based on really, really faulty background and faulty information, and yet we still won't change it. Okay, we won't admit that there's an issue, and we won't adapt to it, and we won't move forward from it. So that's some of the problems that can happen based off this decision making. All right, so with that kind of down as a background, the other thing to keep in mind is that negative events that happen in our life, they are much more stickier in our mind. They're a lot more threatening to us. They can threaten our safety. They can threaten our social status. And so as a result, we're highly motivated to explain things that are chaotic, unexplainable, things that are disturbing, tragedies, any of this stuff. We're very motivated to understand, what is this? Why did it happen? And how do I avoid it again in the future? So one of the things that we can think about, and I'm looking at my notes really quickly to make sure I'm, so one of the things that we can think about, you can see the events of this is when when something horrible has happened in our society and it's been perpetuated by another human being. So like if you have a mass murder that happens, I think a lot about Columbine because I teach psychology of violence and aggression. And after Columbine, that was so shocking to people, and they just wanted to understand what was going on. They were, we were just dying to hear about the answers and hear about why did these kids do this, and how do we come up with results to present this in the future. And the media definitely fed into that need to know. So there was a lot of constant media coming up with speculations and here's what's happening, and people just kept watching it more and more. And then what ended up happening is that eventually there's this narrative that got put forward is that this was something done by kids who were bullied, and we need to stop bullying because this is why these kids did this. And it made people move forward and not really think about this anymore, because now we have an answer, and now we can come up with solutions. You go 10 years later, and they started really doing more of an investigation into what happened Columbine. And you find that that assumption that these were just bullied kids and they were lashing out was actually incorrect. These two young men were trying to basically create a terrorist attack. They were looking to do a bombing and not a shooting. One of them was the mastermind, and he definitely it wasn't the fact that he was lashing out because he was bullied. He was lashing out because he was angry that he just felt like he was so much more superior to other people, and how dare they make him feel a little different. The kids weren't bullied as much as they had thought. They actually got along with a lot of kids. They got along with their teachers. They were going to prom. So this is the stuff that happens, is that these negative events are so strong and so overwhelming, and we want answers to them. And then we come up with the answers, and they may not actually be the correct answers later on. Okay. So this is the thing, is the negative events are stickier, and they're also a lot more powerful in terms of how much they shape the way that we're going to respond to things. So let's talk about conspiracy theories, because that's why we're all here. So what is a conspiracy theory? So a conspiracy theory is basically, it's a wide variety of speculations. So when I'm looking at this, like just of like after there's been some unresolved conflict or some horrific event that's happened, people start to kind of say, well, what is this? Why did this happen? What's going on? And the conspiracy theory, what makes it a little bit more interesting flavor is that it's this assumption that it's caused because of some sinister, powerful group of people who are behind the scenes, and they're playing puppet master, and they're doing some kind of secret cover up. So the conspiracy theory is this concept that there's this group in power that is doing something and hiding it from everybody else. And there's a lot of different kinds of themes for conspiracy theories. It was interesting going through them, and there's so many, but there was historical events that are so hard for people to process that other people could, resort to such horrific things. People will often kind of say it didn't happen or was a political scheme. So there's conspiracy theories that the Cold War was completely staged, or that the Holocaust never existed, or that Sandy Hook didn't happen. It was all a political setup, or 9/11 wasn't real, or that the moon landings were staged, and none of these things happened. So there's definitely conspiracy theories that said that some of these things are so kind of awe-inspiring, like the moon landings, or things like 9/11, that there's no way this could have happened, and there was some big nefarious group that orchestrated this. Lots of conspiracy theories about people faking their deaths. Elvis, Tupac, they've had, who else? They've had, Jimmy Hoffa. So when people have, died, they've said that they've gone into witness protection, and here's all the evidence that these individuals are still alive. Lots of conspiracy theories around engineered diseases and engineered chemicals and tech that's used to mind control us. And then, of course, some of the favorite ones are the alien ones, that aliens are everywhere. And apparently Eisenhower actually signed a treaty with them in the 1950s to allow the aliens to reside on the planet. So these are some of the kind of themes of conspiracy theories, of that somebody's doing something, this stuff really happened, and they're just trying to cover it up. So the concept of a conspiracy theory is a little bit problematic, because theory from a science perspective is very different than the way we kind of use the conspiracy theories. So a theory in a scientific realm is a tool that we use to help kind of organize a body of research that's going in a certain direction. So when you look at scientific theories, it's not built off one study. It's an arduous process. It takes a lot of time. So you'll have a study that is conducted. So you'll see something like people blindly obey authority figures. And this is like the Milgram study. So Milgram did his study where he set up an experiment where people believed they were shocking somebody up to 450 volts. And in his study, 60% of people went up and shocked a person up to this level. And this was pretty surprising finding to most people at the time. They were like, there's no way that this is possible, that people would do this, that they would harm another person just because an authority figure is telling them to. So what happens after Milgram? You have more studies that are conducted. Study. And then you start to see that this research is supporting that original kind of hypothesis and that original study. And then over time, you might find that some people start to look at the research in a different way, and you end up with modifiers. So it doesn't mean every single person is going to blindly obey authority figures. There's things that are going to increase your tendency to obey authority figures, and there are going to be things that are going to decrease your tendency where you're going to step up. And then occasionally you might have one study that doesn't find the same results. And this doesn't contradict the entire body or dismantle the theory. It could lead you to another alternative explanation for things, or it could lead to another line of research that's going to now help you understand like the new way of looking at this. So this is how a theory works, but we often think, I think in the layman and the layman perspective, or just those of if you're not in the middle of the scientific research, we tend to toss out the word theory as if it's an opinion, that it's not 100%. So therefore, there's always some room to say that that's not accurate. And that's not how scientists look at this. Now, when you're trying to dismantle science or dismantle a theory, similar, the same thing. So this is Andrew Wakefield was the person who published the article that autism was linked to vaccines, and it got into this peer-reviewed medical journal. And so this one right here is a really powerful experiment that people want to latch onto, because if autism is linked to vaccines, then we now have an understanding of what's going on. And then now we can start figuring out, well, what do we do to prevent kids? How do we change the vaccines, or what is it about the vaccines that could be having an impact? And then how do we change that so we can keep everybody safer? So once again, first initial study, exploratory study, gets into this peer-reviewed journal article, not a theory yet, but what ends up happening is the first set of researchers conduct a study to kind of confirm this and find out that it's not correct. And then that ends up, that's not enough to discount this entire study. But what happened is that more and more studies started coming on, and they were finding over and over and over that this finding here that was in the first study wasn't accurate. And eventually, after more investigation, what they found was that Wakefield had actually lied about his research, and he was trying to basically discount the current vaccination, because if he could get people afraid of it, then he can release his own vaccination and then make money off of that. So he was in a lot of trouble for this. But what ends up happening is that this here all gets kind of ignored. And then this ended up, even the Wakefield study, because that's so powerful to hear this, led to a lot of conspiracy theories about this, about who he was and how it was working and so forth. So this is how science typically works. This is how it's supposed to work. And as a result, this is how we look at theories. So scientists aren't going to be as prone to jump on a conspiracy theory, not because, just because they're conspiracy theories doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be inaccurate or that they're necessarily going to be wrong, but because they don't have enough support behind them. They're typically not going to be verified with consensus, historical records, or scientific evidence. And many of them are often disregarded just because they're super strange and bizarre and very unlikely. So a lot of conspiracy theories, as fun as they are, aren't going to be taken seriously kind of in a scientific perspective because of the lack of data that supports them at the time. So some of my favorite ones as I was going through this that were pretty entertaining, and it turns out conspiracy theories have been, they're not anything new. They're around, they've been around for years and years and years. One was that Adolf Hitler survived and he fled to the moon. So that's one of the arguments. Another one is that Nero actually, there was a big fire that burned Rome, and they said that he actually burned it on his own. He set Rome on fire so he can rebuild it in his liking and the way he wanted it. This is kind of interesting because with the conspiracy theory, historical records have indicated that it was actually the Christians who had torched Rome, but that's still under suspect as well because they were torturing the Christians at the time to get them to confess to torturing Rome. So the question is, maybe Nero did it, but we don't know. So it's still like, but it was this concept that he's the one who burned it. Another one that's really funny is that there's this powerful New World Order that is, it's got a bunch of, the people who are like in economics and politics and individuals who have a lot of sway in certain fields around the world, that they basically are kind of like a new age, new world Illuminati type group, that they get together and they are pulling the strings to plan, like to basically run the entire world, and that their headquarters are in the Denver airport. So the Denver airport supposedly sits on top of this entire city that hosts the New World Order. There's a lot of ones about Earth, flat Earth, that the Earth is flat, the Earth is hollow. And then my favorite one I read about was that Prince Charles, they believe he's actually a vampire. And this comes from, let me make sure I double check this. So one of the rationales about this is that he is a vampire because it turns out that he is related to Vlad the Impaler, which Vlad wasn't actually a vampire. He just impaled everybody. And a lot of the royals and Charles bloodline are known to have a disease which has an iron deficiency that makes people sensitive to sunlight. And so because of these two things together, people suspect that Charles actually might be a vampire. So these things are a little bit over the top, okay, maybe not just a little bit, but this is one of the reasons they get disregarded because they're just very unlikely. But it doesn't mean that some of these conspiracy theories haven't turned out true, that something is going on behind the scenes. And so there have been some situations where people are like, I don't know if I really buy into what the message is that we're hearing. And then turns out that there was a little bit more going on. So when, the government was trying to say that what was going on, that what crashed into Area 51 was a weather balloon, it turns out it wasn't a weather balloon. There's always still a lot of conspiracy on if it was an alien ship or if it was just a normal kind of government spaceship. So there's definitely a lot of conspiracy theories about Area 51. Another one, even though Hitler, highly unlikely he went to the moon, the skull that they had for years and years is evidence of Hitler, that Hitler did not survive. When they actually looked at it fairly recently, it turned out it wasn't his skull. It was actually the skull of a female, an unidentified female, which of course creates a lot of conspiracies on, well, where's the evidence of Hitler actually committing suicide, and did he really flee? But we know that the skull that they have was not actually Hitler's. For a period of time, there was a lot of conspiracy on how the governments were trying to use weather warfare. And it turns out like they weren't necessarily successful, but it doesn't mean they weren't researching it. So during the Vietnam War, there was multiple governments across the world that were putting a lot of money into research to see if they could hack or basically manipulate the weather and kind of use it to their advantage against their enemies. And so it wasn't successful, but there was a lot of research into that. And there's been research for years and years going into the fact, are there aliens out there? And there was a lot of money that was being channeled into those research programs all the way up until, I think, the 90s and possibly early 2000s. And then there's been some cases which there have been horribly unethical research experiments that have been done on American citizens and other people around the world. And just in the United States, there were studies where the government wanted to understand the impact of LSD as a point of mind control. And so they were actually running studies where they were giving LSD to American citizens to see the impact it had on people. The Tuskegee Experiment, where they took the Black males and were you doing syphilis. They were testing, kind of looking at the process of like how syphilis went through like from start to end. And then they continued to do this experiment even after the individuals were, we even had a treatment for syphilis. And so it was a really cruel, horrible experiment. Smoking and lung cancer, for years and years and years, the tobacco companies were trying to squash and keep the research, frame the research that was coming out about smoking and how it was impacting lung cancer. They were trying to keep this under wraps because it was going to affect their bottom line. And the same thing with NFL and traumatic brain injuries with football players. This was something that also was really, really hard to get out there and have people recognize that this was damaging to people because of the motivation of ignoring it because it would affect kind of like money and income. So these were some conspiracy theories that were true. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, is that, we're going to talk a bit about some of the negative aspects of conspiracy theories, but are there positive aspects of this as well? So not all of them are wrong, but as I mentioned, most of them are pretty kind of far reaches, and not a lot of people are going to entertain them as real serious, like kind of sources of information. Now, with that said, how do we get pulled into conspiracy theories? So what is it about conspiracy theories that makes it, makes us want to listen to them? So the first off is that most conspiracy theories are harmless. They're narratives, they're fun, they're silly. A lot of us, I think, get drawn into it because of the intrigue of it, the mystery of it. I mean, we see this in our movies, we see this in our books. I think about even like Scooby-Doo cartoons, where at the end they have the big reveal, they pull off the mask, and it was that one person who orchestrated this real elaborate thing. So I think some of the research has found is that we like conspiracy theories because they're entertainment. They're funny, they're entertaining, they're definitely interesting. It also creates a sense of drama and excitement to feel like you're the person in the know and that nobody else knows what you know. And so it was fascinating because this summer I was reading, was it Douglas and Preston? It was a book by, I think it was Douglas. Douglas and Preston do a lot of books together. And I think it was Douglas, and or maybe it's Preston, but one of them was working with, they did a nonfiction book, and they were talking about their experience in Italy when they were doing research into the monster of Florence. And so there was apparently the serial killer that was in Italy, and they started to kind of like, there was a local law enforcement officer that had come in, a detective who had asked this author to help him with his research. And it was really fascinating to go down this spiral of events and all the conspiracy theories that were around who the identity is of the person who was the serial killer, and the fact that people are hiding it and what was going on. And the author actually, at one point, there was a conspiracy theory that said that the detective was actually the killer, and that the author was the one that was trying to cover it up. And so he was really bad. He was kind of flabbergasted about this, because he's like, I don't know how this is possible, or have they come to this? And the other guy said, well, welcome to Italy. He's like, now you're an accepted Italian, like as a foreigner, because basically there's this concept that everybody has this idea that somebody's doing something, somebody behind there is pulling the strings. And so even when the author was saying, well, I didn't get into this, he had a lady that came up and said, but did you really? And so it was interesting, because it was this idea that people know something more and they're in on the secret, and nobody understands what's happening. So this is one of the pulls of a conspiracy theory, is that feeling of we know something that other people don't. Now, for the majority of us, a conspiracy theory is just what it is. It's fun, it's entertaining, and we're not going to automatically link it to a true explanation for what's happening in the world. But there are some things that can make us more susceptible, or prime us to want to hear these explanations or lean towards these explanations. So first of all, if you look at the situational factors that kind of prime us to want to hear about, or to kind of want us to to believe conspiracy theories that are out there. A lot of it happens when there's a threat to yourself or your community. So when there is chaos happening in a society, when you are under direct threat, it can definitely, like, we sometimes forget that social situations are complex and people just want sometimes simple solutions for things. And so when there's a threat to a community or a threat to society, it makes people very, very uncomfortable. And so during these time periods, conspiracy theories might seem more plausible just because they're simple answers. They're fast, quick answers when you're just wanting to get some control over your life. The other thing that's kind of interesting, going back to my violence and aggression class, is that cults also pop up a lot more during chaos, and more people will jump into the cults or go towards the cults or be more susceptible to the cults during this time period, because once again, they're looking for simple answers to complex things that are overwhelming. Another thing that happens is when there's something that's big and traumatizing or uncomfortable, and this is where Kahneman comes back in about biases and our faulty thinking. We assume that big events have to have big causes behind them, that it can't be like, if you have, for example, let's say a house burns down and 10 people die in it, and we find out later it's because a bird flew in a window and knocked over a lantern. That doesn't make sense to us because it can't be that mundane. It can't, there's no way something so simple could lead to something so big, so tragedy so big. And that doesn't sometimes make sense to us. So it's easier for us to say, no, I bet somebody burned that house down so they can get the insurance rates, or they can get something about insurance, or I bet somebody had they had something out against that family, or there was some other reason why this happened. Those people were targeted. So that's another reason, is if it's really big and there's not a clear answer for it, that we have to say that there has to be something more to this. Another one is the feeling of powerlessness or lack of control. So this kind of goes into these other two events here, is that when you feel like we're not comfortable with not having control over situations and feeling like we can't, make things go into the directions we want them to happen. And when this happens, it makes us more likely to want to buy into conspiracy theories. This one, it's kind of interesting because I've thought about, like, when I talk about the Black Plague, whenever this came on the scene, if you look at medieval medicine, it wasn't that advanced. And so when people started dying and people didn't understand what was happening, this is very scary and uncontrollable. So some of the explanations for the plague that came up at that time was that it was the conjunction of 3 aligned planets that happened in 1345, which released toxins from the soil. It was caused by bad air. It was punishment for people's sins. There were some other ones that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But whenever there's this chaos, it makes people try to find ways to, once again, say, here are the reasons why this is happening. This is the stuff that makes sense to me, so I'm going to go with this more, even if it's not accurate. I remember something similar happening in the 1980s when HIV and AIDS came out on the scene, and people were so terrified about what this was and how you contract it. And I was a kid at that time, and people were spreading things like, you catch it from water fountains. You catch it if you drink after somebody's, if you share a drink, if you kiss somebody, you're going to catch this. It's going to be from the toilet seats. And so none of this stuff was accurate, but it didn't stop people from wanting to come up with all these explanations and going down these incorrect conclusions. And then you see the same thing happening right now with the pandemic and COVID and all this sort of thing, all the different types of conspiracies that are popping up, from political scams to you should drink bleach and it'll be fine. And it goes back to the idea of like that fear of what's happening. How do I control it? How do I keep myself safe? And so it makes you more prone to try to find the things that you feel like you can have control over. So a lot of this is definitely can be influenced by your environment, but there are some personality qualities that make some of us a little bit more susceptible to this. And what they have found in some of the research is that people who tend to really, like, not just kind of entertain conspiracy theories, but really kind of adopt them, there's some qualities that make us more primed for this. And one is that if you see patterns and things that don't have patterns, which is kind of interesting. So this is also associated with our tendency to want to believe in paranormal. So they will put random dots up on screens. And what will happen is that some of us will feel like that dots have, like some of the dots have intentions, like these dots over here are doing this and these dots are doing this over here. And other people will just see a random pattern. And if you put intentionality into these things that are random, that makes it more likely to kind of see the differences of what could potentially happen, even if there's not a connection to it. Another study they were looking at was that people who believe they would conspire. So if you ask them, how likely would you do this? Would you conspire to conceal this? If they said yes, they would do it, then they actually believe more other people will do this as well. If we believe our life is controlled by outside forces, that we don't have control over the situation, that other people are dictating what's going on. Another one is if a person has uncertain self-esteem. So if they're struggling with their self-esteem, the message of inclusion is very, very powerful. And in connecting with other people who have these similar ideas and traits and kind of having this group that you identify with is something that can be very, very strong motivator for people who are struggling with their self-esteem. And then another one that's kind of interesting is those who like sensation seekers. So people who like thrills, people who are looking for the excitement of it all, that this is something that can increase your susceptibility to buying into a conspiracy theory. Now, in terms of where does it go from, this is fun, I'm entertaining these ideas, I like these conspiracies, into getting up to a point where people are now endorsing them to a level where they're taking actions against others or, acting on these conspiracies that they've kind of created. And when I look at this, it's really interesting how much it is similar to the steps that a person gets into from starting out of, I'm joining this social club that turns out like, okay, now we're going to do baby steps here, here, and here, and here. And it leads to like maybe suicide or some revolutionary kind of idea. Similar thing with terrorism, like how they start out with engaging people in small ways, and then they kind of build on this over time until people decide to act on it. It's a similar thing that happens in domestic violence or intimate partner situations, where a person starts out going on a date with somebody and it goes out really well. And then how does it get to the point where now they're ending up in the hospital? And so when you're looking at what skews a person's reality, and just a really quick overview, there's a lot of stuff in this, but what ends up happening is you don't start out here. You don't start out at the highest level. You start out with musing and kind of like the smaller thing, you start entertaining. And as you start working with other people and you start to convince yourself like this could happen, then you move to the next step and you justify or explain like, here is why this is going on. So we started as a social club and now they're asking me to donate all this stuff. Okay, I'm donating money to them because I really like this organization and I support their cause. And so therefore I've been donating my money. Now they're asking me to not hang out with my friends and family that aren't like this because they're affecting my ability to be part of this group. So then they start to isolate you. And then you justify the rationale for why you're isolating. Well, I'm isolating because I really believe in this and this is what's happening and this is. And so you do these little baby steps until your entire reality gets pulled into however the group is thinking, which makes you more likely to be to kind of do some of these extreme situations. And as I mentioned, this is a similar thing that terrorists do, where they don't start out saying, hey, let's start out being suicide bombers. They'll start out priming and looking for people who are looking or interested in topics. They're looking for people who are angry, people who are frustrated, people who are, they're just looking for people who might be open to the message. And then they recruit them and they have people come in and say, hey, would you like to talk about this more? And then they baby step them up into this level. And I feel like a similar thing happens with conspiracy theories of how people especially when we talk about Facebook and social media, it's been able to create echo chambers. Okay, so what happens with social media and streaming is that it allows for conspiracy theories to spread very quickly. They get popped around to all different types of groups. People can share it. And another thing that was really interesting is at a Western Psychological Association talk that I went to this last year, they were discussing how when you look at these tech companies, that they've discovered that people, like the biggest thing in terms of boosting their revenue is they need to keep people engaged with their services longer. So if you get people engaged with their services longer, it increases the revenue. One of the ways you engage with, get people engaged is you can send them negative content. So Facebook had done a study and they recognized that people engage more with information that's more negative than it's positive. And this is where Facebook got in a lot of trouble, and the whistleblower has come out and talked about some of these practices where they push these negative things on, like kind of, they have an algorithm where you're going to see more of the negative things than the positive things. And as a result, you're going to engage with those more often. And what ends up happening is, you're talking about conspiracy theories and misinformation and stuff being shared, is that instead of going through and like fact checking and trying to determine, is this really real? Is this accurate? People are kind of engaging with other people who have a similar mindset. And they're all experiencing, like they're just sitting around justifying, hey, I agree with this. I agree with this. I agree with this. We're just going to share memes. We're going to share articles. We're going to share things that support our idea. And you're not getting any kind of outside individuals. You're not getting any kind of like people to play a counterpoint to it. So you're not getting outside perspectives that might be different than that. And that can be really scary, because these individuals, as they start kind of bouncing around and talking about this stuff, it can really make them even more pulled in to whatever those ideas are. And so this is like, when you look at some of the groups that are really negative out there, and kind of how they share these conspiracies, like QAnon and the red pill movement and things like that, it is people kind of sitting in these echo chambers and bouncing these ideas back and forth with each other, and kind of supporting them, and not necessarily going to look at this critically to see if this is maybe the right pathway or the way to think about things. So that social media definitely fuels a lot of this right now. Now, there are some side effects of toxic side effects of some conspiracy theories, and people's engagement with certain conspiracy theories can increase hatred and polarization, especially when you're looking at conspiracy theories that you're targeting or assuming other people are the reason for, the reason why this happened. So, for example, going back to the Black Plague, when that came out and people were afraid, there was a lot of conspiracy theories that were going around that Jewish individuals were poisoning the wells, which then led to hate crimes and discrimination and things that targeted that group of people, because people assumed that they were the cause behind it. It's a similar thing after, like I said, after the AIDS epidemic, was that it increased hate crimes towards the LGBT community, because people were blaming them for this thing that was going on. So when people are engaging in conspiracy theories that are targeting other groups, that can definitely make it challenging, because it can increase conflict with those groups. It also, a thing about conspiracy theories is, if you're not necessarily engaging with groups that target other groups, but you're just more kind of like, well, this is how the greater government is doing this, the governing group is doing this, why do I even bother? It can actually lead people to disengage, and they give up, and they quit trying to be actively involved in their politics. They quit voting. They quit trying to make changes, any kind of positive changes. And the Jolly Rose Douglas study, they actually found that when you get too big into a conspiracy theory, people will quit making efforts to to like it said here, they were looking specifically at climate change. They quit doing efforts to try to mitigate climate change. So overall, what happens is the more engagement in conspiracy theory can actually lead to disengagement with your community and your society. And that's really dangerous because it leads to bystanders, and where people just become apathetic and they don't try to move things in the right direction because they just give up and they think there's no point to it. Now, in terms of what we can do, one of the big things they say to help kind of, change the impact that conspiracy theories have on us is education. So a big aspect of it is teaching people that societal problems are complex. And I have to talk about this in my class all the time. If anybody's trying to give you a black or white answer for societal issues, they're probably trying to sell you something, or they're trying to convince you of something. Because when you're looking at like social psychology or, sociology or anything that's dealing with like complex human systems, there's a lot going on with that. And there's not a simple solution to it. Also increasing people's sense of control and the fact that they feel like even if they're in an organization or a government or a society where there's people making decisions, that they can do things that can make changes. They can be heard. They can have a voice in the way things are being managed. And then another one too is that even though you teach people about things and you establish a sense of control, this doesn't necessarily stop people from believing conspiracy theories. You have to really establish value of a person in that community. So what they found is when they were looking at Black populations in the United States, and they were teaching them, they were doing this here, they're doing it in sense of control, it didn't necessarily decrease the belief in conspiracy theories. And the reason why is because the Black population were actually victims of conspiracy theories that came true. So if you're a part of a minority group or a marginalized group that you've been victimized in your society by past practices, you're not going to necessarily agree or immediately take down your guard. So if you want to reduce people's fear or their likelihood to condone a conspiracy theory, you've got to make sure that people feel like they're valued and that they have, like I said, a sense of control, and they're not going to be necessarily victims in their groups. When a person has gotten really pulled into conspiracy theories, how do you get them to disengage? And once again, at that talk I went to, and I also looking at some research, this is really hard. They don't have an answer, because once a person has been fully kind of indoctrinated into a conspiracy theory, it's really hard to have an argument or a discussion with them, because if it's based off belief or if it's based off opinion, then, or the fear that your information, no matter what you say, is an opinion, so therefore you're wrong, it's really hard to have an argument about that. So trying to get people to disengage is really challenging. And I'm curious, when you look at people who have been, when you're trying to get people to disengage from terroristic ideology, they have to do certain things like making them feel like they're supported, taking care of their families, putting them in control. So some of the things that we talked about here that make a person want to believe a conspiracy theory, they often have to address those things to help a person move away from ideology, like I said, ideology that's going to endorse terrorism. Now, the thing about that is that it never fully takes a person away from the ideology. They may not stop believing it, but it might stop them from acting on it. And I'm curious to see, I don't know how that would apply into this situation. So there's not a lot of data on this. There's not a lot of information. They don't have a lot of answers for this. But I am curious. It would be interesting to see if some of the things that they use when you're looking at cults and you're looking at terrorism, if some of those tactics would be used in a similar way, but the information is not there. And so that's still to be determined. Now, the whole thing about the conspiracy theories, one of the things I thought was great is that we hear a lot of negative things about conspiracy theories. And I was looking at this, I was like, well, yeah, some of this stuff sounds pretty negative, but is there a positive to it, especially when they've been proven right? And so I was looking at one of the researchers, articles, and they were saying there could, I mean, this would be like, this is a rich area of research. It hasn't been done yet, but they were saying that, is there something positive to conspiracy theories? So when people start putting out conspiracy theories about this group is pulling the strings and they're making these decisions and it's kind of altering their perception of their leadership, it, number one, allows people to maybe challenge hierarchies that are in place. So they can push against the hierarchies and maybe move things into a positive direction, or get companies or people who are in leadership to realize that they need to dispel the conspiracy theories by being more transparent. So the conspiracy theories, if they're a result of people not explaining what's happening or leading in a transparent way, this could actually be something that prompts better leadership. So this is one of the arguments they were saying that could be a potential positive of when conspiracy theories are coming up in a society. Same thing that happens in organizations, because with conspiracy theories, it's not just in society. It actually, you have conspiracy theories that have it at workplaces and places where other people, leadership, are making decisions. And if the employees don't understand what's happening, they can generate a bunch of organizational conspiracy theories, which could then motivate the company to have to figure out better ways to put out these fires and address the fears and be more transparent. The other thing here is that there could be, instead of associating that all these negative traits, that if you're more likely to see these things, that these are kind of like negative personality traits that make you more willing to believe in conspiracy theories, they said there's actually, when you're looking at people who have personality traits that are interested in conspiracy theories, that they might actually be positive personality traits. You could be a creative thinker, a person who's open-minded, a person who's really sensitive, and you're kind of willing to look at things in a different perspective. So these are not necessarily bad traits to have. And it's interesting because when I read this, it was very similar to when they talk about people who are prime targets for cults, is that there's these 6 I's. And so there's independence, in the sense that they're by themselves for the first time, insecurity, okay, that they might have some of that self-esteem, instability. But it was also like inquisitive, that a person who's questioning things, who wants to understand the way the world works, and that they're trying to understand the bigger perspective. And that, so inquisitive is not necessarily a bad trait, but they might be more primed to fall victim to other people. So the other thing they talk about is innocence, is if they're naive and they haven't had a lot of experiences in the world, that it makes them more likely to trust the authority figures who are giving them evidence that they're not critically evaluating. So, so this is one of those things where there could be people who are just creative, positive individuals who are open-minded, but if you're not critically thinking about the research you're getting, it could lead you in the wrong direction. It can make you more susceptible to the incorrect information. Now, with that said, I do have my favorite conspiracy theories. There are things that I'm definitely more prone to want to hear and get fascinated with and to listen to, and I really want certain things to be true. I'm a big cryptoid. I want Bigfoot to be out there hiding. I want the paranormal to be real. I can't wait to discover Atlantis. These are the things that if I hear about these, I get really excited. I want to follow them, and I totally get pulled into the drama and the research. But as a scientist, I also recognize that I can't completely embrace these until I have more data behind it. So I can always hope, but I need more like evidence to get me to say to anybody, like, I completely believe in this. And it's kind of interesting because, if we ever did get solid evidence, then I would be one of the first people who'd be like, let's switch this to over here. But until then, I can always hope. And these are like some of my favorite, as I said, favorite stories, favorite dramas, and they're always highly entertaining. And I'm always kind of hoping that maybe something new will be discovered. Okay, so that is what I have right now. I'm going to stop the share. Okay, and then Paige, if we want to open it up for questions, or we only have a few minutes, I pushed it right to the 4-minute mark. So if anybody has any questions, or if not, I'm happy everybody was willing to show up.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. This was fantastic. You went over so much in such a short time, and I really appreciate it. We have some people just coming in with some comments saying applause. Andrea is the best. Of course, we knew that. And I do have a couple questions though for you.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if I'll have the answers, but put them out there and we'll see what we have. So go ahead.
Have you found in your studies any kind of correlation between people who are more religious and people who believe in conspiracy theories? Or if you are religious, you would be less inclined? Was there any kind of correlation there between religion and conspiracy theories?
So I don't know about religion, because religion's a little different beast, but there is some correlation in the belief in supernatural, and however you want to define that. So the belief in the paranormal, the belief in the supernatural, and the interest in conspiracy theories. So that doesn't mean that people who are religious or people who have a belief system are going to immediately go into wanting to believe in conspiracy theories, but it goes back to that idea of seeing patterns and things that might be correlated. And so they do seem to see a linkage between those two groups from what they found in some of the studies. But yeah, so there's something with that, but how much of the population falls in that and who falls into that. So you can't just say, if you're spiritual or if you have a belief system, you're going to be a conspiracy theorist. That's not necessarily there, but there is some correlation that for some people that could be, there could be something with that. So yeah, so that's a good question. And I was looking into that too. And so that was interesting because it came up in my last talk when we were looking at like why we believe in the afterlife and so forth. And they found that same, I thought it was interesting that study came up again when I was looking at this study. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Definitely. What about other demographics? Did you find that anyone of a specific age, anyone of a specific race or ethnicity, do they fall into any kind of pattern?
There's no differences on gender. They don't have any correlations among gender. Younger people, and that makes sense. So people who are younger individuals, young adults tend to be more prone to this. And if I connect that with the cult stuff as well, young people tend to be more primed for being targets for cults. Mainly because they're at that age where they're first time away from their family. They are open-minded and open to the world, and they just want to explore things in a unique way. And you're just getting a lot of really cool ways of looking at the world. And so it makes you really amazing in the sense that you have this ability to make positive changes in your society, but anything is a virtue and a vice. It also can make you very susceptible to people who are being a little bit more manipulative on things like that. So they said that younger people, so that tends to be more of the age group. In terms of culture and race and ethnicity and that sort of thing, I don't know. I didn't look so much into this, but I do remember at the talk, they were saying that individualistic cultures tend to be more prone to conspiracy theories than collectivistic cultures. And that's an interesting correlation. So they said, like in the United States, we're more prone to adopting conspiracy theories than, say, another country that's more collectivist, that has more faith in their government and things like that. And so, and that kind of makes sense. We're very much about control. We're very much about, we need to be able to do things. We want explanations. And so if something goes sideways, it would make sense that maybe Americans would try even harder to exert more control over the situation. So that was, like I said, that was an interesting correlation, and why we're doing that, you got to be careful about. But they did notice that westernized cultures tend to fall for this more than collectivist cultures. And that might be because, however people, yeah. So I don't know the full reason on it, but yeah, that was some of the correlations that they saw with that.
Definitely. So we got a couple of questions that came through the chat. Are people who grew up watching the X-Files more likely to, quote, believe?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea. So one thing that was interesting, I did find, so I don't know if watching the X-Files will make you believe more, but they did find that a conspiracy theory that's more exciting and interesting, you're more likely to want to endorse it and buy into it than ones that are boring. So going back to that idea, we like the drama, we like the excitement, we like the suspense. I thought that was really funny, is that that if it is something that's really exciting and kind of a fun, interesting, intriguing conspiracy theory, we're more likely to want to listen to those and endorse those than we are the ones that are really dull and boring. So I don't know how that relates to X-Files, but maybe if it's more entertaining, then we're more likely to kind of lean towards that. I had a whole issue where I was watching Discovery Channel documentary. I didn't realize it was a mockumentary, but they had this whole entire thing about Megalodon, and I got real excited about it because they were showing all the evidence for it. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's Megalodon. And my friend is like sitting there going, I don't think this is real, but I really want the animals to win sometimes. And I was real excited about Megalodon. And then it turned out afterwards, they were like, Andrea, you should go look this up. And I looked it up and it was all fake. And I was like, no, but it was interesting because my friend was not interested in Megalodon at all, because she was like, I don't have any interest of a shark eating everybody. And I'm like, but the animals could be real. But she got really excited a few weeks later about this, this thing that they put forth about helium beer. And there was these guys who were drinking beer, and then they were talking and like they had been inhaling helium. And she got so excited about the invention of helium beer and shared it. And I was like, I don't think that's real. And then I looked at it and it turned out it was all fake, and we were both devastated. So, you know, it is funny how like the stuff that we're excited about, we want to believe more. The big thing is when you find out it's wrong, you have to be like, all right, until I find Megalodon, until helium beer is here, we can't completely get on board with it.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I'm there with you on Megalodon. I'm actually there for the helium beer too, though.
Either one of those would be fun.
Those could happen at the same time. I would be thrilled. Did you find anything in your studies about whether somebody had a formal education level, and if that would mean that they would be able to perhaps see through some of these holes quicker, or
I don't know. So they do recognize that education, and it's mostly because education is it's kind of like, it's like an inoculation. So when you learn about critical thinking, and you learn about how to figure out resources, and you learn to be wary about who's giving you information and how to go track that information down and so forth, that makes you less likely to buy into it, because you're going to be a little bit more skeptical. That doesn't necessarily have to come with a formal education, because there's a lot of people out there who kind of learn how to do this on their own. Like they'll go out and check their resources and things like that. But education is often like the kind of the way that a lot of people get this information on how to start thinking about resources. So they do recognize that educating people on this topic often helps them be a little bit more wary in the future of how people are using persuasion tactics to get them to believe misinformation or things that aren't necessarily accurate. So there is a correlation between that, those two different kind of connections there.
Definitely. Yes, that makes sense. And so much of what you've said tonight makes sense, and is also, as you said, the more sensational aspects are a lot of fun. So I appreciate how you shared with us some of your favorite conspiracy theories. And that's a great lead in to all of our programs in October. We're exploring vast mysteries, including Bigfoot. We do have a fantastic Bigfoot presentation that I encourage all of you to see. You can check that out at DeschutesLibrary.org, along with all of our other great, fun, free programs. And of course, we also have programs such as lateral reading, which is how you can take a source and go sideways to see what the credentials are behind it and figure out how this information has gotten to this point. So it's kind of one of those things that you're talking about there, just Andrea, about how formal education might not be the key, but these critical thinking skills, the library can help you with all of that. So we really just want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Andria Woodell for joining us tonight. And thank you to everyone who has stayed through our presentation. All right. I'm going to say good night, everyone, and a huge thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.